Well, first off, I apologize for not having a show last Friday because we had technical difficulties here. Bunch of technical difficulties here. But anyway, whole new week to fuck up, so welcome to another edition of 42nd Street Pete's Grindhouse. Now, what would you say would you consider the worst animal attack horror film ever made? And there's plenty to choose from, but one part of a double bill really stands out. And that double bill was something I went to in 1972 at the Embassy Theater called Stanley and Night of the Lepus. I believe it was on a Sunday, and I was hanging out with the Big Al, and we had nothing better to do. So I believe the matinee at that point, maybe it wasn't a Sunday. I think it was during the week. I don't know, might have had a day off or something. We were just hanging out. But a matinee during the week was a whole $1.50. And I guess that was something too, because I guess with the projectionist union, they had to run a matinee so they got paid. So usually there was hardly anybody in the place, and this was no exception. You had a couple, winos, as we called them back then, for the $1.50, they could find a place warm that, crash for, a couple hours. So anyway, we had, indulged in some herb and decided to see this because he looked at the poster, and one's got rattlesnakes and one's got God only knows what, because the poster only had these weird eyes and said something terrible was going to happen. So okay, so we go. Okay, so Stanley was up first, and that was directed by my friend Bill Greffy from down in Florida. And Tim is this Seminole Indian played by Chris Robinson, who sort of has a beef with everybody in general. He's a Vietnam vet. And his only real friend is Stanley, his pet rattlesnake. And of course, there's other people that want to do some stuff. I think it's some kind of land grab or property or whatever. But anyway, the head bad guy is played by the only other name in the film, Alex Rocco, who was actually touring around for The Godfather and was in Florida, and they managed to get him. And being that The Godfather tour was paying for his expenses, they didn't have to put him up in a hotel. So Bill had told me the story that when Alex had to jump in the pool, when they kill him with the snakes, he said there's not going to be real snakes, right? And Bill goes, oh, no, we're going to put rubber ones in there. Well, they did, and they put real snakes in there, and Alex freaked out. I had asked Bill, whatever happened to Stanley, and he pulled out his wallet and said, here's Stanley right here. They defanged those rattlesnakes and sewed their mouths shut so they couldn't bite anybody, and obviously they died right after that. Bill was one of those filmmakers who wasn't too kind to the animals. He did Mako Jaws of Death, and they were killing sharks too. So, hey, it's Florida, whatever. But anyway, Tim uses the snakes to get even, and when this guy breaks into his house, this guy called Psycho, and finds out that there's a nice little, baby bed full of baby rattlesnakes, because Mrs. Stanley just gave birth. Well, this guy butt strokes them all into jelly and kills Mrs. Stanley. So he's killed by Stanley, and then there's a whole bunch of shit going on where Tim loses his mind and Stanley actually bites him. The house gets on fire, and Tim crawls out dying as Stanley slithers off into the swamps. Okay, that was pretty cool. And now we get into the next one, which several big-name stars managed to embarrass themselves, because we didn't know what the fuck we were watching, and all of a sudden it opens up with this kid with an experimental rabbit that gets loose. And at that point, Big Al turns around to me and says, they're fucking bunnies. There's nothing scary about bunnies. There never will be anything scary about bunnies. And I said, yeah, I agree. They should have used groundhogs, because groundhogs are vicious. But anyway, basically what you have is this experimental rabbit got out and fucked like a bunny, and has a bunch of these mutant giant rabbits that are roaming around. Now, the ones that are in close-up are guys in bunny suits basically killing a couple people, and you see some blood. The bulk of it is superimposed rabbits hopping around, and it looks like they're roaring, but they're actually yawning, because they're bored with this fucking film too. So, like I said, you have a who's who of who's going to get embarrassed by this film. Stuart Whitman, who basically was doing a whole bunch of horror films around that time, like Ruby and Eaten Alive. And Janet Leigh from Psycho. Who else was in there? Rory Calhoun for a bunch of westerns, and of course he wound up doing a couple horror films too, other than this. DeForest Kelley from Star Trek, another step down for Mr. Kelly, as he's in this film too, and Paul Fix as a sheriff, because Paul always plays sheriffs. And like I said, these bunnies are actually hopping all over the place till they lure them to a set of railroad tracks where they electrocute them. So now we have fried Welsh rarebit, or whatever the fuck it is. Let's just say Al's mood wasn't put in a good one by watching this shitty movie, and neither was I. And it's sort of a footnote, because Stanley still holds up today as a pretty good film. Then you watch this other thing and you're like, yeah, they're fucking bunnies, and there's nothing scary about bunnies. So that's our show for today. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for tuning in. The Roger Corman tribute on Fusebox.com, FuseboxShow.com will air on the 12th, I believe, as I just talked to Mark. And we have just recorded, instead of using Grindhouse Minutes, where I'm doing this stuff in a minute or less, we decided to use another 12 films and call them Grindhouse Moments, where I can elaborate a little bit more on the films. So that's our show for today. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for tuning in. Above all, stay safe, and we'll catch you on the flip side.